Hello, everybody, and I'd like to welcome you to the December meeting of the Executive. Firstly, I normally do any welcome and apologies, and the only apologies to give this evening are from Councillor Wooderson. But as I look down the table, Councillor Kilbane is not here, and Councillor Douglas is here, so I assume that we've also had apologies from Councillor Kilbane with Councillor Douglas. So welcome to you. The first agenda item is then declarations of interest. So I'll just give a couple of seconds in case any colleagues have any additional declarations to make. So I can't see any today. Thank you very much. And that takes us straight on to agenda item 2, which is the exclusion of the press and the public. So as it says in the agenda pack, if we consider Annex 3 to agenda item 6, which relates to Bootham Park, on the grounds that it contains information relating to the financial or business affairs of particular persons, including the authority holding that information. If we could agree that in a second, normally what I say to colleagues is hopefully we won't need to discuss or debate Annex 3, in which case we can remain in public all of the time. But if we did go into Annex 3, we would have to exclude the press and public at that stage. So I can see a few nods from colleagues around the table, so it's a clear consensus that if we do discuss that annex, we'd exclude the press and public. We'll then move on to agenda item 3, which is public participation. And if I could welcome all of those to the meeting, so those attending and those watching along at home as well. We've got 5 registered public participants today, 3 of who are joining us online and 2 in person. So our first public participant is Gwen Swinburne, who will be joining us via Zoom, and this relates to governance matters within the Executive's remit. Gwen, hopefully you can hear me and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me now?
We can, yes.
Good. Thank you, Chair. May I first thank Section 151 Officer Debbie Mitchell and Councillor Eyre for the publication of some of the key budget proposals in early December. This must have been a challenge and is a significant step on the budget transparency journey. We have a way to go, but we are now on the journey, which after 8 years of zero movement, it feels good. May I ask that Councillor Eyre advises us here and in the website how the consultation process is to proceed from now. I know most will completely miss these upcoming joint decision sessions, as I did, which I assume are the start of the process. Also, the statutory business ratepayers consultation. Will this happen this year for the first time? Debbie, may I finally take a moment to thank you for your work on the recent citizen audit. You are open, professional, polite and thorough. It builds confidence. Chair, I have a dreadful feeling of foreboding regarding the completely indulgent UN deal you are asked to sign. The endless need for recognition by Councillor Crackhill and housing staffers is frankly embarrassing. The report is silent on any costs or benefits or the time staffers will use in this bid for recognition. Nor is there mention of the inevitable international trips for the girls and boys. We have been here before under the 2011 admin with multiple off-radar trips to South America, South Africa, Korea, China, and so on. This whilst many of our housing tenants are living in accommodation that is in desperate need of repairs and upgrading, and with many council homes lying empty. Councillor Crackhill, instead of wasting time and money on this self-indulgence, uncosted and unrequested mandate, please focus on your desk and portfolio and fix our own council accommodation and estates ahead of more self-promotion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, and we'll consider your comments when we get to those agenda items later today.
Thank you.
Our second public participant today is Councillor Fisher, who is here in person, who has registered to speak as the Strensall Ward Councillor regards item 5, Haxby Station. Councillor Fisher, you have 3 minutes once you've started. Welcome.
Thank you very much indeed, Leader. First of all, can I congratulate officers on what I think is an extremely thorough and extremely detailed and accurate report on Haxby Station, the feasibility of the two sites. My history with Haxby Station goes back to 1987 when I was first elected for that ward. And we looked very hard at the only site that was available, which was the allotment site. But there were significant problems. The land wasn't available and the owners of it were not very keen to sell. There was the disruption and relocation of the allotment holders, which caused a lot of bat feeding and have led to a considerable lack of productivity. The site was cramped, it was difficult to develop, and there wasn't a huge amount of car parking spaces, and its proximity to Ralph Butterfield School was a massive issue. So we then looked at Strensall. We got a site at Strensall, some planning gain came in, and we got got the money to build a basic halt there, but unfortunately after local government reorganisation, the council felt it wasn't adequate, so they decided to look at unfeasible and very expensive sites where the land wasn't available, and that fell through. Now, I'm pleased to see finally some movement on this, because it's vital that we do get a station to serve not just Haxby Wigginton, but the much wider area. It will not just serve that area, but Strensall. It will serve the whole of the southern Rydale hinterland. Now, many of those people will not have public transport or sustainable access to get to this station, and therefore it's important the site has sufficient car parking. I'm pleased to see that this site on Tothorpe Road has 4 acres, some of which can be used, a lot of which can be used for car parking. This will, of course, lead to some traffic movements in the area, but it will also remove traffic moving further into York, because people will not have to drive all the way into the station in York. So it should ease congestion further in the ring road. It will also, and this is a point that wasn't brought up in the report, I don't think, reduce traffic on the A64, because currently people who want to go to Scarborough have to drive all the way into York and then go back an hour later the opposite direction on the train to Scarborough. Many of them just choose to drive. If they have the option to drive to this station and go to the coast or to Malton and visit the many things there, that will benefit it. Now, there is a drawback to Site 2, and that's in the green belt, and obviously that will need to demonstrate very special circumstances. That will be critical, but that's for planners to deal with. The accessibility by sustainable means is critical. I'm very pleased to see that the cycle and pedestrian access has been looked at through Usher Park, Swarthdale, but we also need to look at accessibility issues from Strensall. The path along Strensall
30
Road.
seconds.
Thank you. The path along Strensall Road is very poor, very dangerous, and they might like to look at a public footpath along the south side of the fosse. The critical thing, though, is the bus service from Strensall. It is important that we link this site to Strensall with a bus, and also preferably a through bus to Haxby, which will mean that people don't have to drive to enjoy the flesh pots of Haxby. So I urge you to accept the officer's recommendation of Site 2, and then it will be up to Her Majesty's government to put the money where the mouth is and provide the funds to bring this project to fruition. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, and we'll consider your comments when we get to agenda item 5 later. Our third public participant is joining us via Zoom, Councillor Pearson, who is registered as a Haxby and Wigginton ward councillor, regards agenda item 5. Councillor Pearson, hopefully you can hear me and you have your 3 minutes.
Thank you and good evening, executive members. I wish to speak in my role tonight as ward councillor for Haxby and Wigginton, and on behalf of a number of residents who have taken the time to write to their local Lib Dem team about the station plans. We've received around 50 emails from local residents expressing their views. So firstly, I'd like to thank members and the transport officers who have worked so hard to get this project to this stage. A lot of residents are really pleased that after more than 30 years of waiting, this is finally moving forward with real momentum and cross-party support. Of the residents who wrote to us, about half were in favour of the recommended Site 2, and the other half felt that other sites or no site at all would be more appropriate. As a ward councillor who has given this station proposal a lot of thought over a lot of years, I can understand the view that a central site would be best in terms of getting people to walk and cycle and out of their cars. But some residents, including some members of Haxby Town Council, also suggested other sites, including closer to the ring road. However, there is a recognition that Site 2, the Tothorpe Road site, has certain advantages, including less impact on surrounding homes, and also the benefit, of course, to Strensall. By my reading of the officer report, this Site 2, Tothorpe Road, is the most deliverable if we're to achieve this ambition this side of 2030. Indeed, funding rounds come along, if we are lucky, every decade or so, and we have sadly missed out on the last couple of opportunities. My hope is that this is third time lucky. So key concerns, other than the sighting, included the localised traffic implications for Station Road and Towthorpe Road, particularly the speed and volume of cars. There were also concerns around the impact on Usher Park and Swarthdale Estate, which residents are concerned could become an unofficial pick-up and drop-off area. Therefore, as officers develop plans further in conjunction with Network Rail and other partners, much attention will need to be paid to these issues and any mitigations. Suggestions, recommendations and requests included extending and enhancing the bus routes such as 13 and 14 to the station and up to Strensall, ensuring adequate parking is provided and that parking is free, security issues like pollution, noise pollution and other environmental emissions caused by the station and the trains travelling there and the access to the station, the protection of surrounding green spaces and green belts, improving access by foot and cycle.
30 seconds.
Thank you. Improving access by foot and cycle from both Haxby and Strensall, investigating traffic calming measures and parking enforcement on nearby streets, and of course decent station facilities such as loos and waiting rooms. So many thanks everyone for listening. I'll watch this with interest, and I will of course send a summary email to officers after this meeting so that they can see the concerns that were raised. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you very much, and we'll consider your comments when we get to agenda item 5 later today. Our fourth public speaker, who is also joining us via Zoom, is Councillor Pavlovich, and he's registered to speak on agenda item 7, which is the Housing Delivery Action Plan. Hopefully you can hear us, and Councillor Pavlovich, you have your 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. How am I coming through?
Loud and clear.
Excellent. Thank you, Chair. And I also thank and acknowledge the involvement of the executive member in the press release about the Council's Housing Delivery Action Plan. And I suspect it's Councillor his recognition of the vast improvement of housing consents in the Labour years up to 2015. One wonders where we'd be now without that commitment to develop the homes York needs. And I always suspected Councillor Ayre's fixation with my party was because he's a closet supporter. The release recognises the increase in housing completions in the 3 years immediately after the last Labour administration, when 3,394 homes were delivered. Contrast that with the previous Lib Dem administration of 2007 to 11, and now low numbers of a little over 540 per year since 2018, whilst you've been in power. Planning consents get houses built, and completions occur in the years following. They don't just appear as if by magic. You have shown that the Lib Dems are not serious and have never been serious about addressing the housing crisis in York. And only as a consequence of a Labour administration do we see sufficient housing delivered. Your failure of vision, of process, and of a coherent plan during coming up to 7 years of Lib Dem power has led to a situation where we failed to meet the government housing delivery test. By only delivering 83.7% of the housing required for York, you now need to create an action plan and demonstrate how you will not only identify a 5-year housing land supply, but also a 20% buffer. The fact that we are now in this situation is absolutely down to your own mismanagement of the local plan process. At this absolutely pivotal time, you opted to make our Chief Planning Officer redundant, who had 18 years of experience of York, and have opted to rely on highly paid consultants instead. And what a job you've given them. A year ago, the inspectors were so concerned by the approach you've directed officers to follow that they have asked you to scrap the whole thing and start again. We wait to see how they will respond to your protestations that you are right and they are wrong at the next public hearings in February. And so York Council is yet again failing a government target and having to find ways to demonstrate competence.
30 seconds.
Thank you. And what could this mean in practice? I quote paragraph 3.10 of the action plan, that increasingly the protection afforded to the green belt and the historic fabric will be challenged in planning applications via special circumstances due to increasing housing needs. What a mess you've created, and what significant consequences you've identified. If we end up with expensive appeals costing hundreds of thousands, or unwanted building of high rises in the city centre and developments in the Greenbelt, the people, the voters of York, will know who is responsible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, and we'll take your comments into account when we consider agenda item 7. And our fifth public speaker is with us in the room, Honorary Alderman Brian Watson, who has registered to speak on agenda item 10, the Lord Mayoralty for 22-23. And you'll have 3 minutes once you've started on the microphone.
Thanks, Chair. I'm here tonight to support the recommendation for Councillor Waters to be given the Christmas break to consider his position for the role of the Lord Mayor. The reason for this is to help him study the nomination and the problems it brings. As party councillors, that's political parties, you have the party machinery around you in what you do. Standing for election, you have the problem of being selected on your shoulders. After that, everything is relatively easy. I'm not being disrespectful to any of you. I'm just summarising your position. But as an independent, it is entirely different. You have to write and edit your own material for the electorate. And that will entail at least 2 leaflets, photos, finding a printer, and that's not easy on a budget. Have them printed all at your own cost. Then you have the problem of delivering leaflets. And I know from experience just how difficult and expensive all this is. Even if you have managed a few helpers, it's nowhere near what is really needed. Dedication plays a major part. Without that, you can give up even the thought of becoming a councillor. Then, if elected, you have the issue of keeping in touch with your residents. Believe me, these are very legitimate points. So put yourself in Councillor Waters' position. You have another election in a couple of years' time. Can you afford to take your eye off the ball for a year? And if not, how do you go about it? Lots of things must be going through his mind in these days. An independent councillor is by no stretch of the imagination an easy job. It is not even easy to get your voice listened to because of party lines. So to be elected again and again speaks volumes about your service to the residents. I have for a long time tried to get a fairer way for independent councillors into the system. At present, they will be qualifying for the title of Honorary Alderman twice over before the chance would appear to be Lord Mayor. And that qualifying period is 20 years service. Yet a party member needs only 5 years service. The other year, an emergency change was put forward to 4 years because the party concerned was virtually wiped out. That didn't work, so it was revoked a couple of weeks later. Now, as councillors, we were proud that we could say the role of Lord Mayor was available to anyone who was part of the council for those few years. But in actual fact, that is not the case. This is a special year brought about by different circumstances that probably will never arise again. Whatever Councillor Waters decides, I would urge you to try and find a way that enables independent councillors to be in the system and not merely onlookers, as they deserve this respect. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, and we'll take your comments into account when we consider agenda item 10 later in the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that now takes us on with thanking all of our 5 public participants to agenda item 4, which is the forward plan on pages 3 to 6. I'll just give a couple of seconds in case colleagues have any questions on this. If not, could I please see all those in favour through nodding or indicating to me that they're happy to accept that agenda item. So it's a clear consensus in favour of accepting agenda item 4. Thank you very much. That then takes us straight on to agenda item 5, Haxby Station and site selection, which starts from page 7 in the agenda pack. I should say, as well as the obviously 5 registered public participants, 2 on Haxby Station, we also received 2 written comments from residents with regards to Haxby Station, which have been circulated around to all executive members so that they are aware of that. And I can see that James and Richard have joined us, so I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So as you will remember, back on the 30th of September, Exec were updated on the Haxby Station project. And at that meeting, you accepted the 400k grant from Department for Transport to develop the business case for a station at Haxby. And you also approved acquiring some land, either for the station itself or for the replaced allotment site if the station is placed in the centre. A number of potential sites have been explored, and when considering all the various issues, there are only really 2 viable sites. Richard will update you now on the evaluation that's taken place and the recommendation to develop a business case on the preferred site.
Thank you. I'm pleased to report that just less than 2 weeks ago, we did complete on the land at Turthorpe Road, so that is now in CYC's control. Also, just if I may, due to new information which has come to light today, I'd just like to strike the second half of paragraph 16 from my report, please. This concerns the potential for a compulsory purchase order of land to the east of Site 1. So this report considers an assessment of the 2 potential locations of a new rail station within Haxby. To take this project forward, members are asked to consider the potential sites and then endorse a single preferred site for further development. This will afford City of York Council the best possible opportunity to progress this project and present the strongest case possible to central government for the granting of further funding to enable the full delivery of a new rail station at Haxby. The background to this was covered back, I think, on the 30th of September executive, so I'll skip over that particular area. An early appraisal of the 5 sites which James has mentioned was undertaken, and lots of different factors for suitability were considered. I'm aware that following a briefing with certain members of Haxby Town Council early this week, Councillor Pearson's alluded to as well, there was some concern that we'd quite easily dismissed a potential parkway option close to the ring road. So I did promise that I would include a bit more detail of why that was the case, but I will keep it brief. The main basis for that is due to planning concerns and the fact that our planning colleagues have recommended, I've said it's essential that the land to the south of Haxby needs to be kept permanently open to maintain the scale and identity of a compact village and to maintain connection to the open and historic setting, prevent coalescence with the greater York City area to the south of the ring road. But there are several of the different factors which I've assured Councillor Pearson I will relay to himself and members of Haxby Town Council for why the parkway option was not feasible. So yes, so the two different sites which were deemed feasible, Site 1 at Station Road, which is the site of current allotments, and Site 2 at Turthorpe Road. As agreed on 30th September, we've now acquired the land at Turthorpe Road, which would help to de-risk the delivery of the project and could be used either as the station location itself, if Site 2 was chosen, or as a replacement location for the allotments displaced if Site 1 was chosen. We've therefore asked Network Rail to undertake some work to hone down the proposal to just one single preferred site, which is the purpose now of this report. Great many factors went into weighing up the 2 different sites, but I think, as you'll probably appreciate, not all factors are of equal importance. Some are absolutely critical to the chances of this project coming to fruition. I have put those in a bit of a priority order, as you'll see within Annex D. But as a bit of a summary, land acquisition and the constructability seem to be certainly of the utmost priority. I think it's not unfair to say that with the feasibility of certain sites. Some are just far more feasible for construction than the others. And this is the case with Site 2 in terms of the land acquisition, the overall size of the site itself. We now own this land as well. Site 1, certainly the major drawback with Site 1 is not necessarily the displacement of the allotments, because we could displace them to the Southwark Road site. It's more the timescales involved with that displacement. They are statutory allotments. We would have to seek approval from the Secretary of State to do this, and just the timescales are just prohibitive to that site being as feasible, certainly as Site 2 Southwark Road option. I think it's quite clear that yes, if all things were considered, and certainly due to the location of Site 1, it is close to the population centre of Haxby. There's no doubt about that. However, most of the other factors which were considered do overwhelmingly of greater importance, I would say, and higher value than that. Obviously, there's a number of issues which have been raised in terms of concerns with the local highways, for instance, and pollution and traffic, which we will be considering certainly at the next stage of development. So yes, the officer's recommendation today is to approve Site 2 at Turthorpe Road as the preferred site location for Haxby Station.
Thank you very much. Neil.
Yeah, so just to clarify, Chair, we'll send the correspondence we've received this afternoon around the executive in terms of striking off the second part of paragraph 16. The landowner has written to us this afternoon to say that they were willing to enter into negotiations with the authority to purchase that land, but clearly we have no basis for understanding what those commercial negotiations might be. But the constraint in respect to the allotments would still provide a major barrier, as Richard has said, to the actual development of that site. So whilst it would, should we say, improve the case for the site in the centre of Haxby, it certainly doesn't reverse any of the officer recommendations in tonight's report, and we'll make sure that correspondence is circulated.
Thank you very much, James.
Thanks. I think just to finish off on this, the assessment that you've got at Annex D is primarily a technical assessment, which identifies the preferred site. As is identified in recommendation 3, the next stage is to engage with residents in that area and potential users about the mitigations that might need to be made to make that as good a site as possible. So that's the next stage, as well as developing the business cases, that engagement with the community about how we address some of those things we've talked about sustainable transport routes, routes to Strensall, etc.
Thank you very much. I've just been asked to double check that on paragraph 16, it's from furthermore the additional land to the end of that paragraph that you want deleted. Great, thank you very much. So obviously open it to colleagues for any questions or comments. I think what I would say first is that the delivery of this new railway station has been a long-held ambition for many, many decades, as we heard from some of the speakers and from this administration. And I really welcome the report. And we've had recently the failure of the government to really invest in the levelling up agenda through the what was pretty disappointing, I think that's being polite, integrated rail plan. But I'm pleased that here in York we're doing what we can to improve the local transport network and to invest in rail. And local residents in the north of the city have been pretty patient for that much needed new railway station for a number of decades, as you can see from paragraph 10 in the report. And when the consultation was undertaken back in May 2020, 91% of those that responded supported the principle of a new station in Haxby. And delivering that new station provides direct access to the rail network for thousands of local residents in the city and the wider region. And this means improved access to employment, business, leisure opportunities, connectivity for York, and faster, more efficient and sustainable travel. And paragraph 5 outlines that to make progress on the scheme, appraisal work was carried out on 5 sites to identify potential locations, which led to the identification of the 2 sites before us this evening. And we can see from the report that having evaluated both sites, site 2 has that much stronger case due to the reasons set out by the officers, but ownership of the land, deliverability within the required timescales to get funding from the Department for Transport, connectivity, and also ease of access to the site. And as already mentioned earlier, is larger for facilities such as car parking and is further away from that primary school that has been mentioned. Given this scheme is a priority for this administration, I do agree that we should take every opportunity we can to de-risk the delivery of this scheme, and that is therefore best achieved by proceeding with site 2. And I'd also like to add, whatever executive agree to tonight, as mentioned in the paper, there will be further public consultation during the next development stage to better understand any local concerns and any measures which will be considered to mitigate any impacts that that station might have. And a few I jotted down from Councillor Fisher and Councillor Pearson were around access, traffic calming, footpaths, and links to Strensall, which I know officers will pick up and include in that consultation. And with that in mind, I'm happy to recommend to executive members that we approve the 4 recommendations in the report and proceed with site 2. And with that, I look forward to working with the local community, and in particular with Network Rail and the Department for Transport, to ensure that this is moved forward and that we get that funding from the government to do what we need to do. On that, I can't see any other hands. Councillor Douglas, and then I'll go to Councillor de Gorme.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the report. And I agree with the leader that it is a great thing to see, hopefully a station come through into Haxby. But I have to say, I think the jury's out on which location is better. I find it interesting, Councillor Aston, that you focus your comments on transport. But the reality is that this report doesn't talk about any transport strategy and how the 2 sites sit within that for our city. I'm not really fully informed, I don't think, about what the aim of this the station is. And that surely informs which is a better site, either site 1 in centre of Haxby or site 2 out on the Towthorpe Road. The other thing that I notice isn't included, which I think is tremendously important for our council now that we have declared a climate emergency, and we are supposed to be moving towards net zero, is there's no One Planet York assessment looking at the carbon full travel cycle for each site. So commuters travelling to site 1 versus site 2, what's the carbon impact of that? And therefore, you know, we're in the dark on that as well. So I've also had it raised to me by local residents that they are concerned that the Towthorpe Road isn't suitable for commuter buses of that size. How is that going to link effectively into Strensall for site 2? So I would like to say to everybody, I think the decision should be deferred until these important issues are considered. And I just don't think, I don't agree with Councillor Fisher's assessment that this is a detailed and comprehensive report. I think the transport aspects and climate aspects are very important as well and should be considered alongside planning. And I think that the report is very weighted towards the planning. And in my opinion, that's not where it should be. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll ask officers to pick up any areas that they want to respond to. In particular, for me, it would be useful to understand the risk around the Department for Transport and Network Rail's timescales and potential funding of the station and why speed is important here. James?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of issues really. I think one of which is we have looked at the population capture by the 2 locations. We've looked at the local highway issues, both in terms of car travel and in terms of cycling. I think the thing I would say is we are developing a business case. This is not a decision to build the station. This is to develop the business case. The 400k is on a tight timescale from DfT to deliver, but also completing that work gives us access to the new stations fund. One window of that has already opened and closed, and we want to try and catch that next window of that funding if at all possible. So potentially, not only does pausing defer the 400k, it potentially means you miss out on the funding for the station in its entirety as well.
Neil.
Just to highlight to members the existing policies of the authority in respect of local transport plan 3, which is extant till at this moment in time until 2030, that public transport is your top priority as an authority to achieve, and this effectively gives a public transport connection from that quarter of the city that currently doesn't exist. I would also highlight that the Haxby station is an infrastructure requirement in your local plan ambitions as a city, which has been fully adopted by full council, so that actually committed to looking at delivering a station in Haxby, which this report facilitates.
Thank you very much. Councillor Dugon.
Yes, certainly very much welcome the detailed analysis at Annex D, and as has been said, I think the funding window is a key critical factor here in the comparison between the two sites. But I don't think that, obviously it depends on the detail of a planning application in terms of access to sustainable travel. But if the site 2 is the one which is adopted, I do think there's potential there to ensure that there is sustainable travel options built into that. And certainly the proposal about the carbon impact, I think, is something we should have in future reports to identify. Obviously, it's an exact science, but what our best estimate is as to what the carbon impact would be of different options we might be considering.
Thank you very much. So we've got the recommendations in front of us, slightly amended with the deletion of part of paragraph 16 that was confirmed earlier. So with that slight change to paragraph 16, are executive members happy to accept those recommendations? I'm seeing nods and some hands. Thank you very much. So that's a clear consensus in favour of accepting those recommendations as amended on agenda item 5. Thank you very much, James, Richard and Neil. That then takes us straight on to agenda item 6, which is securing the future of Bootham Park. And that starts at page 36 in our pack. And I can see that Nick has joined us and that Neil is going to start off.
Yeah, I'll be brief, Chair. Just to give apologies on behalf of Tracy Carter, and Mum's had to go into hospital today, so she's currently with her mother. But I just want to highlight to Executive the challenge that you laid down to officers, paragraph 2 in January 2020, and the specifics there, A, B and C. And I'll hand over to Nick to talk through how we've tried to address those that challenge in our negotiations and the decisions in front of you this evening.
Thank you, Neil, and good evening, everybody. Well, as Neil's mentioned, we've conducted negotiations following the executive report in January 2020, which set out our priorities for the site, which, as Neil has mentioned. So whilst the council do not own any of the 17-acre site, we do own approximately 1/20th of an acre used for access, which is already leased out long-term and for no rental. The developer behind the proposed scheme desired an extension of that lease. And so working in conjunction with our health partners, we've negotiated considerable outcomes, which include the following: approximately £1.9 million of investment in works and improvements, preserved and improved pedestrian and cycle routes, public educational and sports use of the lawns with new paths, the provision of a 7 and an 11-a-side football pitches, continuation of the landing place for the air ambulance, protection and restoration of the historic boundary railings, a development with low carbon heating and other sustainable features, and a capital sum as set out in the confidential appendix. Now, the report recommends the establishment of the necessary legal agreements and associated delegations to replace the current access agreement with a 999-year agreement in return for securing all of those negotiated outcomes. And I should also just say that this is, of course, a very much subject to planning deal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So colleagues have the report in front of them, so I'll open it for any comments or questions. Obviously thank Neil and Nick for bringing it, and to Tracy in her absence. And again, this is a report I'm pleased to welcome, having discussed the future of Bootham Park for a number of years now. As colleagues can see from the background section of the report, a considerable amount of work has taken place to reach this point, having had extensive engagement with local communities back in 2018 and 2019, as well as continuous lobbying of the government on behalf of the city on this. And I would just like to take the opportunity to thank everyone who has worked and spent time sharing their views throughout this project. We know from the work that a great many people in the city really care deeply about the future of Bootham Park, and the public engagement to date has really helped identify and secure the public benefits that I know Nick has outlined. At the beginning of 2020, we as an executive agreed to exercise the council's rights as the owner of a strip of access land to leverage ourselves into negotiations and to secure a variety of benefits to the site, including public use of the parkland in front of the hospital and improved pedestrian and cycle routes through the land. Since we made that decision, negotiations, as is in the report, have been finalised, and as a result, 1.9 million investment has been secured in the public realm from the developer, which includes those improved pedestrian and cycle routes, public use of lawns, protection of the air quality monitoring station, continuation of the landing place for the air ambulance, and restoration of the historic boundary railings. We know that Bootham Park is a real important to the local community and the wider city, which is why we've worked hard with partners to bring us to this point. And it has, I know, been no easy task, and I'd like to thank the officers, councillors and community who have been involved in lobbying for and securing those benefits. And therefore, I'm happy to recommend the 5 recommendations in the paper to colleagues so that we can proceed and get on with making those improvements that are in the report. And with that, open it to any colleagues for any questions. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think it's a great thing that this site will be redeveloped. And I'm glad to see for the local primary schools that will be able to have access to the green space and the sports facilities. I think that is excellent. And I know the people who live in that area are really value the fact that they will have access to the green space. I also noticed that it doesn't tell us in the report if that access to green space is going to be in perpetuity. It really doesn't tell us if that could be removed at some point. Do you have the answer for that, Nick? Thank you.
I do. I mean, this, I think Appendix 2 cites the various quite complicated legal arrangements which need to be documented. I think there's about 18 separate legal agreements, but basically there will be a requirement for that space to be set out for 999 years. So I kind of call that perpetuity, really.
Thank you. Yes, we hope that somebody else keeps their eye on it at that point in time, I assume. And I suppose what we're also concerned about is that the One Public Estate report that was created in 2019, there was an awful lot of work and money that was spent on that. And I am rather disappointed that the accommodation development on the site is, whilst extra care beds are tremendously welcomed, of course, in the city there's a dearth of them, that it will be for the higher end of the market. And we know that the provision of care locations for people with less means is very restricted in the city, and we would have preferred to have seen a development that guarantees a mix in that respect. 170 extra care apartments, and we don't really know how many are going to be affordable. And when we say that, we mean truly affordable for people of 60 years and above. Apart from that, I think I can say that I think it's good to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anything, Neil or Nick, you want to come back on?
Just as Nick clearly mentioned, the development is subject to planning approval, so clearly planning members will have their views when it comes to in front of them as to the nature of the development.
Thank you very much. So we have the recommendations in front of us between pages 37 and 76. Again, if colleagues indicate through nodding or hand that they are content with those recommendations, thank you very much. That's clear consensus in favour of accepting the recommendations on agenda item 6. And thank you very much. That takes us straight to agenda item 7, which is the planning policy housing delivery action plan. And this starts at page 77. And I think Neil is going to kick us off on this one, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I'll just introduce Sophie Hall-Thompson, who started with the forward plan team in September. To members. So this report, as set out in paragraph 7 in terms of the reasons for the recommendation, is to comply with our statutory obligations. Can you hear that as well, Chair?
There is a buzzing occasionally, but we've got heating on that apparently is causing a slight buzzing, but I'm sure we'll cope. Neil.
Sorry, Chair. Yes, so in order to comply with our statutory obligations, this report is brought forward for your consideration in terms of delivering a housing delivery action plan. And I would note paragraph 11, that statutory obligation requires the authority to compare ourselves, our performance with a centrally derived figure for housing completions. Paragraph 11, you can see that the 3-year period running up to 2019-20, when compared to your adopted local plan, is very close in terms of the numbers, and that would include 2019-20 when, due to COVID, much development in the city was halted for many months, and we continue to struggle as a city in terms of developers' ability to get hold of materials and the high cost of labour and the scarcity of labour. So in terms of the correlation between the two figures, considering the difficulties of the last year, it is very close. Paragraph 3.5 in the annex, there is a further explanation of the nature of those statutory figures and the comparison with our own local plan as an authority. And then finally, paragraph 7 of the action, there is in the annex, there are the 22 actions proposed by officers for the authority to adopt, effectively to increase and double down on the work that we're already undertaking to accelerate the delivery of housing that has been said by members many times through local plan working group and through executive planning permissions don't necessarily ultimately result in development. That is a matter for developers. And Sophie will be able to answer any detailed questions you've got in respect to the action plan.
Thank you both very much. I open it for any questions or comments from colleagues. Go to Councillor Eyre first.
Yeah, I'm going to volunteer to speak on every item just so I can take my mask off and have a quick breathe there. I think to note, as Neil alluded to, while paragraph 3 does show that we only hit 83% of what is nominally a hypothetical target, as he noted in paragraph 12, it shows that actually against our local plan target, we're hitting 97.7%. I know some people in the city would argue that housing target in the local plan is too low, but I would point to everyone that the last correspondence from the planning inspector actually showed that he thought perhaps it might be too high, and if anything should be lowered. How do you explain that? Well, I think that perverse dichotomy that we have is symptomatic of the muddled government thinking we have when it comes to planning. I won't mention whether a party is a party or not a party, but that's the type of sort of thinking we're dealing with. We were told, I think about 18 months ago to 2 years ago, that we needed to be delivering around about less than 700 homes per year. Unfortunately, then the government realised that particular methodology meant that the vast majority of homes being built would be on greenbelt land in the south with Tory MPs, and as such the methodology was rigged and a lot of that housing was sent back up to the north again. I'm not sure if that's what Boris Johnson meant by levelling up in terms of dumping housing in areas away from Tory MPs, but who knows what he means with anything he says at the moment. Councillor Pavlovich's comments were a little bit confusing. I'm not sure what excellent press release that was gone out that he's read, but I think he misunderstood the figures. Delivery in 2011 and 15 was only around about 555 homes per annum, significantly lower than delivery in 2015 to 2021, which is 789 homes per annum. That recognises that step change and increasing housing delivery. So I think To paraphrase the comments he made at the beginning of the meeting, I can only assume that Councillor Pavlovich is a hidden Lib Dem and supportive of the work that we did in 2015 to 2021. He also alluded to a comparison with housing delivery in 2007 to 2011 being significantly lower. The more astute among us might notice there was a global financial crisis in 2007, and I know it would appear Labour is still in denial 14 years later that actually happened on their watch. I think we have stepped in to deliver to make sure that those houses are being delivered in the city, and the housing delivery programme, which Councillor Crackhill may want to speak about, will be a significant contributor in future years to that housing delivery in the city. In fact, that will on its own deliver around about 25% of our housing target in the next few years. And more significantly of that, 40% of that will be affordable. Clearly, the current system relies on private sector to deliver the vast majority of homes. Local authorities cannot deliver the type of figures that we need to annually to do that one. That does lead to, as Neil alluded to, some issues around that. So we do see across the city certain areas of land banking, and we do see control of supply enabled to maximise profits. So those are some of the issues that hold us back. That's why we've stepped in to deliver, but why we're also progressing the local plan to make sure those sites are available for delivery. And again, as Councillor Pavlovich mentioned, I want to make sure it's put on record that I have highly confidence in our local plan team. I think we have an excellent, very strong local plan team, probably the strongest local plan team we've had since I've been involved at the local authority. The local plan is progressing. The delays to that particular plan have never been anything to do with any administration. It was the government's decision to include the Strensall Barracks as part of a housing programme in national government that slowed that one. Then obviously the issues around nature conservation that threw up, and various issues. I would probably speculate that if it hadn't been for that inclusion of the Strensall Barracks site as a housing site in government policy, we would probably have a local plan at that point now. Again, I won't take lectures from Labour on the local plan. It was Labour who pulled the local plan, amended it, submitted it, were forced to pull it again, amended it again, submitted it, and then finally imploded and left us with a local plan with no progress whatsoever. And it was actually further back than it was when they started with the local plan. And I think that's the last thing I will say is that once adopted, the local plan will be the key to housing delivery in this city. It will deliver more than enough of our objectively assessed need for housing and offer significant amounts of flexibility to make sure that in future years, we're easily meeting the housing targets that this city needs.
Thank you. Councillor Crackhill.
Thank you. I'll just add a few comments to that. I think this action plan not only meets the requirements of the housing delivery test, but it will also be a very useful tool to help us build on the good work that we're already doing and to deliver more new homes and more affordable homes in future. Annex A does demonstrate that the trend for housing completions over the last 10 years has shown a steady increase, whilst, as the paper says, there's been a considerable increase in housing consents, with the last 4 full years showing more than 1,100 per year of new homes being approved. The 600 homes being delivered through the council's own housing delivery plan will make a significant contribution to the target housing numbers in the early years of the local plan, and deliver high quality homes on zero carbon sites. These homes are setting the standard in the city for developments that support sustainable lifestyles, help to tackle climate change, and provide fantastic places to live, including a range of affordable tenures. The financial model for the programme means that it will be able to continue building more affordable homes in further phases of development in future, despite the challenges that the council faces in terms of budgets. The additional actions in the paper, the 22 actions Neil referred to, include building on the partnership working we've been developing with housing associations, developers and community-led housing projects, completing the supplementary planning documents that are already underway, and developing further policy on appropriate land use to meet local needs, and ensuring that forthcoming developments are supported by appropriate infrastructure, whilst also progressing work that's already underway to support and develop construction skills in the local economy. As Councillor Eyre says, it is the progress of this local plan overall that will deliver the housing that we need. And this plan forms an excellent basis for embedding actions across all relevant teams in the council, as the paper refers to in the recommendations. And I'm very much welcome it and happy to support it.
Thank you very much. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. I find it hard to be enthusiastic about the housing delivery programme from the council. I wish I could be, because goodness me, does our city need housing of all types, and particularly housing that is truly affordable to the residents who live and work here. Of our housing delivery programme from the council, 600 new homes, 40% affordable. So that gives 48 per year. And the number that are lost to right to buy is 61 per year. Now, these are truly affordable housing because they are for social rent. We know that in York, other completions that are classified as affordable at 80% of market value or market rent are not affordable to most of our lower paid residents. Many are moving out of the city, they're going to Selby, their children are leaving the city, and quite frankly, I think we're in a bit of a desperate situation that I'm not sure that all of my colleagues here at the table today share that view of. So, housing delivery programme from the council, in my view, should be increasing our truly affordable housing, net truly affordable housing. We shouldn't be losing it. And I'm looking at the table in front of me here that covers the years from 2013 through to 21. We are losing our social rent housing. And I plead to you, please think about alternative delivery methods. Our partners out there are willing to listen and want to work with you, but we haven't had any concerted effort in that area as far as I can see. We need housing now, and it just can't wait.
Thank you very much. I don't know, Neil, so if you want to come back at all, it might be verging into the two political. I think Councillor Douglas, no, Councillor Cracker wants to say something. I suspect nationally we have an awful lot in common with regards to some of your comments there about right to buy, and equally in terms of the constraints on local government from national government in terms of what we can do and actually how much more we would like to be able to achieve, and indeed how I know many would like to see the end to right to buy. And perhaps that's a conversation that I'm sure you'll pick up with Councillor Craghill moving forward, rather than misremembering the government's role in some of that. Councillor Craghill.
Thank you. I don't want to say very much, but just in response to partners wanting to work with us, I just would like to say that that is something that we are very much already developing and already in progress of doing. We've started with some relatively small sites where we have worked with housing associations, sold some land for that purpose, and that is developing affordable social rented housing. And there are more of those conversations taking place at the moment. So that is something we certainly acknowledge is a good way forward, and that is underway.
Thank you very much. And so we've got the recommendations in front of us between pages 77 and 136. If I could please see from colleagues if they're happy to accept those recommendations. That's clear. Thank you very much. Clear consensus in favour of accepting those recommendations on agenda item 7. And that then takes us straight on to agenda item 8, which is the Housing Energy Efficiency Programme update, which starts at page 137. And again, welcome to Michael, and I'll go to Neil first.
Again, just Tracy would have liked to have been here to present this. It's very close to Tracy's heart, the delivery of this programme, but Michael will talk through the detail. But just in response to the representations made by the member of the public, I just refer members to paragraph 9.7 of the MOU with the UNECE. There are no legal obligations attached with that accreditation. In fact, effectively, we would expect people from around the world to come and have a look at what's being done in York rather than the other way. But what I can assure executive members that any officers' trips, shall we say, will be absolutely undertaken in accordance with the council's policies and constraints placed upon officers, which is, as you can imagine, in these strict times, not to fly around the world.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Good evening. So carbon emissions in York, a third of them are generated from our housing sector. In terms of meeting our 2030 aspirations of being a carbon neutral city, there's a clear need to reduce carbon emissions from the residential sector. That means both reducing energy demand within our housing and also transitioning to low carbon renewable energy sources. In December last year, Executive launched our Housing Energy Efficiency Programme, and since then we've made some great progress, which is covered in the report. The main headline is that we've attracted over £5 million of central government grant funding through 3 rounds of local authority delivery programme grant opportunities. This will see improvements to 600 homes in York and the sub-region. This is a mix of council homes, housing association, private rented sector and homeowners. All of the homeowners who benefit from this money are low income families who have houses which are poorly performing in terms of energy efficiency. So they will be able to have a home after the work, which should result in cheaper utility bills. The home should be warmer and healthier, as well as reducing the carbon emissions from their home. This year we've recruited a team to work on these programmes, and works have already started, which includes wall, loft and floor insulation, as well as the installation of air source heat pumps and solar PV. The 5 million funding, some of it will run throughout 2022 and into the early part of 2023. And we're hopeful that other grant funding opportunities will be able to come forward in that time to allow us to expand our programme. Alongside the delivery of works utilising the government money, we've been developing a long-term strategy. So this strategy will build on the emerging carbon reduction strategy and the economy and skills strategies to set some long-term ambitions around the residential sector in York that will support project work, as well as incorporating carbon reductions in our business as usual work undertaken by our building services team. So there are 6 recommendations within the report. The first 3 note the good work in obtaining the grant funding, with 1 decision pending regarding the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, which would be specifically targeted at improving council houses. So the 4th recommendation looks to utilise 353 grand of previously approved £2 million investment programme to match fund the improvement of 78 council homes, which would result in improved insulation and the installation of solar PV. Recommendation 5 is to procure and then secure a delivery partner in order to undertake those works. And the final recommendation is to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the United Nations. So this would recognise York as an international centre for excellence on high performance buildings. And this recognises the work we're doing within the housing delivery programme to deliver zero carbon homes, as well as our retrofit ambitions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So open this item for any questions. Go to Councillor Craghill first.
Thank you, Chair. I think this paper demonstrates the progress that we are continuing to make on developing our energy efficiency work. We know that as a council and as a city, in order to meet our climate change targets, we need to scale up and speed up. But like anything else, starting well is really important. This paper sets out how we have successfully bid for over £5 million of government funding so far this year, around 3 times the average per capita award across the country. And this is funding energy efficiency projects that will help to reduce fuel bills for households in York, in the private rented sector, for homeowners and for council housing tenants. I would really like to commend the officers for the work that has gone into these bids and for their continued efforts to do everything possible to deliver these projects within very short government timescales. The fact that the 3rd tranche of funding has a longer timescale for completion by March 2023 is very welcome. And we will keep on impressing on the government that we need more consistent, longer-term funding to deliver at the necessary scale. The projects included in the LAD 3, that third lot of funding, will broaden the scope of our retrofit work to include external wall and underfloor insulation and give us the opportunity to trial some work on a whole street basis. It will also help to develop local skills and the pipeline of work that is needed to grow this crucial sector. As Michael said, the projects we're delivering on the ground are helping to inform the development of our citywide strategy, which will come forward in the spring. The strategy will address embedding retrofit in business as usual across the city, driving a pipeline of work via some focus on local housing where funding can be more easily available, while also addressing fuel poverty and developing financial models to support homeowners and those able to pay as part of overall home improvements. Finally, I would very much welcome our participation as a United Nations Centre of Excellence for High-Performing Buildings. This is based on our work on retrofit and on our zero carbon new build developments. This is all about exchanging research, experience and learning nationally and globally. And that is absolutely going to be a crucial part of rising to the challenge of climate change. And I'm very proud that York is taking a leading part in this. I was a bit surprised by the comments from the public speaker. This is not just about an award, and it's certainly not just for me. If anything, it's for the officers, including Michael, who have got us to this point. But it's not about an award, it's about participating in sharing research and knowledge. And a lot of it will actually, most of it, I expect, will take place through the internet. As we know, that is a very effective way that people do use to share knowledge and experience globally. And I just think it's great that York is participating at this level.
Thank you very much. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is great news to see that houses will be upgraded and their comfort levels improved for the residents of York. And goodness me, don't we know that that needs to happen within particularly our own housing stock. I am rather concerned, as I'm sure you all are, about the funding timelines. That 2.659 million of this money needs to be spent by the end of February 2022. And I am rather concerned, given that I know, as I'm sure all of you do, that the strain on the tradespeople in the city and particularly in the council is huge. So I would be interested to know from the executive member for housing quite how this target is going to be reached in that time frame, spending that money, and what happens if it's not. Does it have to go back to the Treasury? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll just check whether Neil or Michael have any points first, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Craigill. Michael.
I'm very happy to take that question, but I don't know if Councillor Craigill would prefer to take it.
No. I was just going to say that my understanding is we will be procuring delivery partners, but Michael can tell you more about the detail of that.
Yeah, so the first two tranches of money, we've got an existing delivery partner that we're using. Progress was slow at the start. It's quite a bureaucratic funding process. There's lots of technical checks that are required, but the team have worked incredibly hard to work through them, and we're now making good progress. So we've completed a number of projects. We've done lots of promotion work of the opportunities, and we have, at last check, more than 200 people that are interested in taking part. We're processing the applications. We're connecting up to the delivery partners. It doesn't come without risk. There is big challenges around materials and skills in the economy, but we're doing absolutely everything we can to do as many as we can of that funding that we've received. And that's the target that we're working on. There is some talk about potential extension of those deadlines, but there's nothing confirmed at the moment. So as and when there is, we can report back.
Thank you. Neil?
I think I'd just make it clear to members, and I think Councillor Douglas is right to highlight the risk. There is a risk. Government money has been given on very, very short timeframes, as Councillor Craghill noted. We are, as Michael has said, endeavouring to get as many people in the pipeline as possible, get as much delivered as possible. But there is undoubtedly a risk with such a short time frame that the government will effectively come back to the authorities and say, well, actually, we've got to look at how much you've delivered. We need to take that money back that hasn't been spent. However, my experience on these matters, and I'm sure many members around the table have had this experience before, where you've got a proactive authority with good delivery partners and a good record of delivery, then there's on many occasions that money is effectively extended, but clearly it is a risk.
Thank you very much. Councillor Douglas?
Now, sorry, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I am rather concerned about this, given that I think Michael knows I have quite an intimate knowledge of how repairs are going in the city at the moment, particularly, and we're not reaching our targets on much of the work that's going on the council stock. And I do have great concern. I do hope you prove me wrong, but I do have great concern.
Neil?
Just to clarify, the partners that Michael's talked about in terms of the insulation works are different from the housing repair programme that you've highlighted there, Councillor Douglas, and as was agreed by scrutiny, we have an action plan for recovery on council repairs. That recovery plan is in progress and will be reported back to housing scrutiny in March. And clearly members will then have the opportunity to understand the success and or challenges that continue to exist within the skills market and the labour market, as you've alluded to, Councillor Douglas.
Thank you very much. So we've got the recommendations in front of us. It's paper starts on page 137 and runs through to 164. So if I could please see from colleagues if they're happy to accept those recommendations. So I'm seeing most hands and nods. Thank you very much. So it's a consensus in favour of accepting those recommendations on agenda item 8. That then takes us straight through to agenda item 9, which is the Domestic Abuse Act 19, 2021, which starts on page 165. And I can see that Sharon and Anita have joined us, so welcome and over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very pleased to be bringing this report to you this evening. Domestic abuse is a vitally important public health issue that has widespread impacts on our society, both across the country and in York. The Domestic Abuse Act was passed into law earlier this year, and it does confer additional statutory responsibilities onto the council, which are detailed in the report. So I'd like to introduce you to Anita Dobson, consultant in public health, that's going to take you through the detail in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. So so this is about an update just on the domestic abuse responsibilities conferred on us by the Act that, like Sharon says, came into force in April of this year. And also to consider the governance arrangements that we need to have in place for our Tier 1 local authority. So the responsibility for domestic abuse in our council sits within public health, and this allows for an holistic public health approach and focusing on prevention, most important, support for victims and safe accommodation as well. So the Act, like Sharon says, sets out certain responsibilities and they're contained in the report that you've got. But for this evening, there's 2 things to consider. The first is that the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities gave us national guidance for a draft strategy on safe accommodation to be published by the 26th of October. This was a very short time scale and we pushed back hard on this when we had meetings. However, we achieved it and we published it, I'm pleased to say. So that's open for comments, and those comments will be collated and looked at to be put in place for a final safer accommodation strategy to be published on 5th of January. Also, those comments will be taken into consideration for a wider domestic abuse strategy, which is going to be reviewed. Okay. So then the second bit to consider, as well as the safe accommodation strategy, is that Tier 1 authorities need to have in place a domestic abuse local partnership board. Now, at the moment, we've got some joint arrangements with North Yorkshire Council of how we conduct that governance. An independent review or an independent consultation took place, and you've got that in your report. And the recommendation for that was that City of York Council have their own board, but sitting under that, the work that goes on is still joint with North Yorkshire because of the footprint of the commissioning that's required for us to carry out our responsibilities. So basically that's it, and it's just to ask for approval around that recommendation for the governance.
Thank you both very much. I'll open that item and I'll go to Councillor Runciman first.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to emphasise the importance of providing a truly holistic approach to tackling domestic violence and supporting victims. It is of concern that domestic abuse support referrals in York and North Yorkshire have risen significantly since the start of the pandemic. The number of requests for help has increased by 80%. Domestic abuse is a significant public health issue, which has a major impact on the health and well-being of those directly affected and their families. Strategies to tackle it so far have tended to focus on victim support and crime reduction rather than prevention. So I welcome the recent transfer of responsibility for domestic abuse from the Director of Environment, Transport and Planning to the Director of Public Health. This will allow for a more holistic approach across the city and the development of a strategy focusing on prevention, strengthening the support for victims of abuse, and ensuring access to appropriate accommodation. The establishment of a new local partnership board, which will include the Council, North Yorkshire Police, Vale of York CCG, and the Office of the Police, Fire and Crime Commission, is a welcome step forward in supporting existing services. It has emerged following a consultation on a draft joint strategy, as well as the new Domestic Abuse Act. And I'd like to thank officers for working it all out so very quickly. The Act raises awareness of domestic abuse and strengthens support for victims. However, new and comprehensive funding streams for overstretched services are still needed, but not mentioned, to protect the most vulnerable, including providing equal protection for migrant women. Besides clarifying the legal definitions of domestic abuse, councils will also be required to provide safe accommodation for victims and their children, which I'm happy to say is something we already do in York. Excellent work already takes place to tackle domestic abuse and support victims across the city, and I hope the establishment of the board will continue to support this work. As we've heard, a separate report will come to exec in due course to present proposals for a new domestic abuse strategy, along with an implementation plan. With that said, I'm happy to proceed with option 4 on page 171 at paragraph 22 as recommended. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Douglas.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Runciman that option 4 is by far the one that we should be supporting. And I agree with much of what you said, Councillor Runciman, that some of the issues that you raised are issues that are very concerning to me and my colleagues in the Labour Party as well, and particularly around the support that can be given to women who don't actually qualify for public funds. And are we going to do something for them because you are a refugee or seeking asylum? It doesn't mean that you don't experience domestic abuse. I've also have a great concern about the funding. It's only a year's funding, and how that is going to support the front line. And the organisations that deliver on these services are generally in the voluntary sector, and their services are extremely stretched. I think we have little to no capacity in the city at the moment for some of these services. It's a huge concern. And also those organisations, if they're going to provide these services, they do need more than year-to-year confirmation of funding around this kind of initiative. So I was wondering, of the £334,000, if anything of that is going to the front line, and how much is. And then finally, I'd like to ask also how we're going to involve the voice of people with lived experience on the partnership board. I think we know that it is really important that people who have experienced domestic abuse can represent themselves and give the viewpoint of somebody who has experienced that. Is tremendously important. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Anita?
Yeah, thank you for that. There are a number of ways we're exploring how we hear the voice of the victim in any forum, because what we have to take into consideration is when we talk about domestic abuse, it's revisiting trauma. So we're looking to take advice through IDAS. That's the service that supports victims, and looking at the best way of taking that forward. So that's the stage we're at the moment. Whether the best way forward is for an IDAS representative or a victim itself that's in a place that they can be comfortable in that forum. So that's what we're exploring at the moment, because it's really important that we don't expose people to reliving trauma. I think Sharon for the funding.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you, Councillor Douglas. And I know Councillor Runciman agrees as well, because we've had this conversation around the risk of the funding. Obviously, along with other local authorities, we have flagged that nationally. We have made our view as City of York Council alongside other councils that really this funding has to be sustainable. There isn't a great deal that you can do with non-recurrent money, and I think we would all agree that particularly as we come out of the pandemic, that support for victims of domestic abuse, but also perpetrators, so to get them out of the cycle of abuse is really important. We're very aware of that as we're developing our commissioning plans for how we spend the money. And you'll note that in the report, there's also a request for executive to agree that we don't aim to spend that whole amount by the end of March next year, that we actually agree to carry it forward for 6 months into the next financial year. That will allow us to do the detailed planning, really, to make sure that we're spending the money we've got wisely, as well as continuing to lobby government for sustainable funding.
Thank you very much. Councillor Crackhill.
I don't think I really need to add very much, Chair. I support all the points that have been made and the proposals. So
thank you. Sorry, Councillor Douglas, I was told your hand might have gone back up.
Sorry, yes, I just wondered if there was any comment to be made on how the organisations who are providing the frontline service and particularly around talking therapies and recovery and rebuilding a new life that are within the voluntary sector are being supported through this funding or other funding streams. Thank you.
Yeah, so one of the things that we would like to do as part of that funding is look at a very in-depth needs assessment. So we've done a preliminary needs assessment that's formed the draft strategy, but one of the proposals to spend on that financial envelope is an in-depth needs assessment, which will give us a better picture of need and then what we need to do to fill the gaps. We have regular meetings with IDAS and understand that the issues that they face both with capacity and meeting the need, the rising need, and obviously the pressures from the pandemic, both on their own workers and victims of domestic abuse. So we have got plans for that. Hopefully that in-depth needs assessment will give us a clearer picture, so we'll be able to put the money exactly where it's required.
Thank you very much. So we have the recommendations that start on page 165 to 196. So if I could please see from colleagues if they're happy to accept those recommendations. So that's clear consensus in favour of accepting those recommendations on agenda item 9. Thank you very much to Anita and to Sharon. That then takes us on to agenda item 10, the Lord Mayoralty 2022-23, and this starts on page 197, and I'll ask Janie to introduce this.
Thank you, Chair. The Executive is invited to consider the point system for the annual nomination of the Lord Mayor for the City of York. The point system and the accumulation of points is detailed in the table, which appears at paragraph 5 on page 198 of the report. As it can be observed from that table, Councillor Waters has accumulated the most points. However, I draw your attention to paragraph 6, in which Councillor Waters has indicated that he would like additional time to consider his position over the Christmas break before he gives an opinion. Bearing that in mind, I draw the Executive's attention to the recommendations which are contained in paragraph 2 of the report on page 197. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. So I'll open this agenda item for any comment or debate, but if there isn't, I would recommend that we accept the recommendations that Janie has just outlined. If I could please see support from that from colleagues, please. That's clear consensus in favour of accepting those recommendations on agenda item 10. That then takes us through to agenda item 11, which is urgent business. As far as I'm aware, we don't have any urgent business. So just to thank everybody, councillors, officers, public participants and those watching for joining in. Obviously wish everybody well for Christmas and the new year, as this is our last executive before next year. Thank you all. Bye-bye.